Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome once again on this beautiful Saturday afternoon to the CCP series of talks. And today we have got a wonderful topic on maltreatment of children, the signs and symptoms to look out for. Today, before we bring up the speaker, I'd like to introduce the moderator for this afternoon. Our moderator for today is Mrs. Deva Mary William, who's all the way from Sungai Petani, Kedah. Deva Mary has got a diploma in early childhood education and management from the University Utara, Malaysia. And she's also a member of the Education, Welfare and Research Foundation since 2008, a foundation that actively involved in reforming high-risk youths and early intervention for children with learning difficulties. She has been a member of this foundation since 2008, and she has also been the chairman of the Penang Pro team from 2008 to 2010. And she has been the secretary of EWRF, Education, Welfare and Research Foundation of Sungai Petani, Kedah since 2019. Deva Mary is also a motivation speaker and team building trainer representing this foundation. She has been giving talks for students in the secondary and upper primary, for parents, for para-counselors, children and family. She has also been mentoring about 10 teachers with English for junior program initiated by this foundation. And she has also been the advocate for prevention of child sexual abuse, commonly known as CSA, and awareness with PS the children. So to one and all, welcome, and I present to you Deva Mary William, our moderator. Over to you, Mary.
Good afternoon, Father. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Father, for the intro. Okay, I'm very sure that every one of you here is aware of all the acts such as Child Act 2001 and SOCA, Sexual Offences Against Children Act 2017, and policies such as CPP, Child Protection Policies, is there to help our children, to save our children from harm. But what is the use of these policies and acts if we cannot identify the child in need? That means the signs and symptoms. Okay, this afternoon, we have a very renowned speaker, Dr. Valerie Jaques. Let me introduce to you, let me talk a bit about her, Dr. Valerie Jaques. Okay, Dr. Valerie Jaques is a consultant clinical psychologist and the founder of Integrated Psychology Network Sdn Bhd for the past 23 years. In 1998 and 1999, she was one of the resource personnel on the development of feminist counseling practice organized by Asia Pacific on women, law and development held in Seoul, Korea and Bali, Indonesia, respectively. In 2000, she was stationed in Bangladesh as the international expert on child counseling, working on a UNDP project to provide psychological support for street children. In 2005, she worked as National Psychologist for Median Sans Frontiers, Doctors Without Borders. 2007, Dr. Valerie was selected by the UN Department of Safety and Security to be trained and certified in critical incidents stress management, CISM, for support in the Asian region. Okay, without further ado, I welcome Dr. Valerie to present her talk. Over to you, Dr. Valerie.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Father, and thank you for this invitation. I am unmuted, right?
Yes.
Okay, yes, you can hear me. So thank you for this invitation to share with you some of this. Let me upload the slide, then it works easier. All right, you can see my slides?
Yes, we can.
All right, and you can hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Doctor. Yes.
Okay, that's great. Now, when I was asked about this topic, it's quite a heavy topic. I'm a person who immediately looks for pictures because a picture tells 1,000 words, and this picture came in front of me, and I thought this would be a good picture to put us in a position as to why maybe we want to understand this topic on signs and symptoms, where we can't really tell, not so easy. A child doesn't actually put a paper up and say help. They actually cannot stand up and say help. You know, you don't see this, you don't hear this. And at the end of the talk, you will see what I talk about, what is explicit and what is implicit. And the reasons why we look for signs and symptoms is because we cannot see things so directly, and they are not able to voice it out so clearly. So I thought, as this is a heavy topic, I thought we begin with this image and this verse that says, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Now, this is a very nice picture, and it presents a freedom, a safety, comfort, love, that you're being looked at, you know. Eye contact is there, you can see. And when you have this image, it's a very comforting one. And it's one where we feel perhaps safe, that we are in a space where there's someone who really looks out for us. Because if we understand who Jesus is, then of course we would think that this is the invitation to being free as a child, to being open, to being loved, to not have any fear that you may be harmed in any way. But I think I also want to ask you to think about a picture like this. Maybe in this picture, it's just another person. It's not necessarily a Jesus. But I'd like you to think about this picture, because when we look at the statistics out there, we begin to see that the ones that present as if this is a nice picture are often the ones who are also the perpetrators. And so sometimes what you see is not necessarily what you get. So that's just to put us in the start. And I thought we put this verse out because, you know, this is a heavy topic. And with a heavy topic like this, we need hope. And we need to have a sense of life is not so dark all the time. And we can all be that sign of hope to reach out to children. Okay, so I thought we start with this in mind. Now, I'm also a psychologist, as you all have heard from my, the introduction. And in my world, it's about feelings. It's about getting to see what we don't see on the outside, getting to hear what is not spoken, and getting to feel a person, to be able to step into their world and understand where they're coming from, and therefore be able to journey with them. And so I invite you today that when you listen to this, whatever I'm going to say, and you see the words that are put out on the screen, and that when you see some of the statistics or the comments out there, I ask you to feel. I ask you to step into the world of the child who is perhaps experiencing this and feel. Don't stay in your head trying to figure it out or understand or analyze, because sometimes that takes us away from the severity of a situation. So if we're able to step into the feeling of it, and I ask you as you feel to try to think about your own self and your own life, because maybe some of these things happen to you in your life without anybody realizing or knowing. Maybe some of these things happen to people that you know, and you didn't realize, or you were not able to see it the next step. And sometimes it may be happening around us, but we don't know what to do or how to respond. Because it's not just I pick up a phone and inform someone. but what comes with that, many implications around it, and can we stand to see something through and trust, as in this picture, the children can trust this Jesus in the picture, that we can trust in the process. So I ask you to begin with that mindset. And with that, I thought, let me define a little bit. When I worked in the UN, as you saw, heard earlier, one of the things that was very important was for us to know what the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child was about, because anything and everything that we do must focus on at least this guideline, which is then important. So today I present to you just the first two articles on this UN Convention as it defines the child and what is the right of this child. And just from this alone, I ask whether when we look at the situation, when we think of a mindset, do we think with this in mind, or do we discriminate as well? So the first article talks about the age, that a child in this definition means anyone below the age of 18. Now in Malaysia, this is an article that is still questioned, not absolutely accepted. And that's because in the Muslim environment, or in the under Sharia, they do have children age 16 who are then considered of marriageable age and things like this. So they have not yet ratified this article. But generally in civil law, most of the situations that we look at are looking at children below the age of 18. So even if you are 17 and a half, I've had people who got gang raped at 17 and a half, a week or 2 weeks before their 18th birthday. And this was a case that was then not addressed or not brought up to the parents, and person was not helped in such a way, which later impacted in many ways the person's life as they grew into an adult. So there are multiple things. So do we then think, oh, they're just 1 week away from being 18, so they're considered adult already, and so we do not treat them as under this Article 1, where we still consider them to be a child. Now, Article 2, it speaks about the rights of the child, and it is to ensure that every child is treated without discrimination of any kind, irrespective of the parents, the legal guardians, race, color, sex, language, religion, political opinions, national, ethnic, so social origins, property, disability, birth, or other status. And this was very important because when I worked with street children were extremely discriminated against, where if a child was walking on one side of the street and another parent with their child was walking on that side, they would quickly cross the street, not to be even on the same side of the street, because they considered such a child not human, even to a point. So this is just an example of how we discriminate against one another, even in terms of how we walk on the street and how do we reach out. The second part of Article 2 is about ensuring that the child is protected against all forms of discrimination or punishment on the basis of status, activities, expressed opinions, beliefs of the child's parents, legal guardians, or family members. Now, just from this alone, we can see that when we say the child has a right, it is so difficult for that child to claim a right because they are surrounded in their system by so many, from parents to relatives to school to social systems to the law. And there are many levels to cross to reach the child, to really know what is the truth of the child's experience and whether this is really a form of maltreatment, because there are many layers covering it up in a sense. So I ask you just to put yourself in this frame of mind, understanding the child and beginning to see the child. I think if I asked you to see a child age less than 6 years old, you'd feel very quickly for such a child and say, how can people do this? But if I ask you to think of a 16-year-old, sometimes we are very biased and we have eyes differently, and we look at that 16-year-old and we can judge that 16-year-old as well. And we have different rules or different judgments and evaluations from there too. So the age range of a child is very wide, and therefore it triggers us differently, that we tend to treat different age ranges differently, even though under the convention, it says that the right of the child, anyone below 18 years old. Okay, so I just wanted to stress this as a starting point so that you have this view in mind. The next word to define is the word maltreatment. Now, at first I thought we were going to use the word abuse, signs and symptoms of abuse. And then the topic came out in the poster and it said, oh, it's maltreatment. Okay, and what does that mean? So I thought maybe we define it, and the word mal means not treated properly, right? If we're simple, they don't just say not treated properly. It says to treat cruelly or roughly, and they use the word abuse. So I'm using it interchangeably, okay? Abuse and maltreatment, kind of the same thing. And then when I looked into what is the word abuse about, the word abuse then is said to treat with cruelty or violence. And therefore the similar word of cruel treatment, or whether the word is abuse. So generally, maltreatment means abuse, if you want to put it there. Now, there are also words with the word violence in there. There's also a word of roughly inside there. So how do we treat a person rough? And is regular, repeated. Can you hear me? My internet connection says unstable. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, doctor, we can hear you.
All right, good. It said internet connection not stable. All right.
Yeah.
So just in the definition of this word, listen to what they said, especially regularly or repeatedly. So that means what you're saying is just doing it one time is not considered an abuse. It must be done regularly and repeatedly. Okay, so keep these kinds of words in mind as we then begin to think. Because living at home and growing up at home, we hear sometimes argument, loud sounds, language, and experience that is regular and repeated. And this is like putting drops of poison into your mouth every day, which is not an explicit situation, which is not seen as a cruelty, which in front of your face. It even bruises may not be seen, but we are swallowing this regularly and repeatedly every day. Okay, so this is just words. I ask you to feel these words. Think about maltreatment. What is that shows the strongest association with compromised development? So when we say the word compromised development, it means you cannot grow normally. You cannot grow freely. Somebody's development is being interrupted or being disturbed in some way. And this happens in children. It not only happens in children in their everyday lives, but it happens across their life course. And so if a 16-year-old shows certain signs and symptoms, that 16-year-old is showing that not because it just happened when they were 16, but it is happening, or it happened, as I say, drop by drop, swallow by swallow, over the years of their life that brought them to this place where you now can see something happening. And so when we think of this, if you think of a person whose development is healthy, chances are there wasn't maltreatment. But when you think of a person whose behavior is really high risk, then the question is, what maltreatment was involved in their development that brought this about in terms of the way they behave? Okay. Now we're talking about the development as in what the child experienced in their homes, in their schools, in their environments. And therefore, we think also of maltreatment in relation to environmental risk. And environmental risks are everyone's responsibility. I think we are living in times today where we can say that the environment that is being messed up is not done by the environment, but is the responsibility of human beings. And even our own children, sometimes we are unable to help them because we don't understand how we are in this environment. Okay, so now this is from the Encyclopedia of Infant and Early Childhood Development. I've made a list of, not yet. Ooh. I made a list of articles that I've picked these things from, and you can have a look at it and access them at some point in time. Okay, so let's move on from defining this. I thought let's look at what the statistics say by our social welfare, and oops, I don't want to see this bar. Okay, anyway, so this is a chart that talks about children in need of care and protection, done by the Social Welfare Department, and it is done by sex. So you can see the lines in green are the females, the lines in blue are males, children. And when you think of between 2016 to 2018, you can see the numbers rising. Yeah. Let me get a pointer out. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse moving?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so look here between 2016, you can see just from the bar chart alone how the number is increasing, and even for the boys it is increasing. So it's not just the girls only who are in need of protection, it's the boys too. And it talks about the rising number. But look at 2019 and 2020. 2019 rose even higher than 2018. But in 2019, it seemed like the number of cases came down. And I'm wondering whether this was due to COVID, and therefore these are cases of very much explicit situations that are captured by the social welfare. Maybe they were not able to capture what was happening in people's homes, because I believe in 2020, the children who now had to stay home with their parents who had to stay home, there was a lot more stress that was going on at home, and this is not captured under this statistic. So clearly children are in need of protection. When we think of the causes of abuse, what brings people into a situation of abuse? And I've highlighted a few in yellow, as you can see. Family dispute is the highest, is right on top there. And when you think of family dispute, everybody says this is something private, keep it at home. Others mustn't be involved in this. But yet, this is the highest cause for concern. Care by others during childhood, I highlighted that one. It might not necessarily be one of the higher numbers compared to drug addict, negligent parent, or financial problems, or even following the boyfriend. But I highlighted care by others during childhood because this is one of the things where a child is given out to a babysitter or even given to another person to take care of. And there is a conflict and confusion even in relation to who is my parent? What is a parent? This is a confusion. And so not knowing who can punish you, who can discipline you, and how will they manage the care for this child is a big question mark. So look further down, drug addict, negligent parent. These are just all the different categories that they have put down. I think follow boyfriend means if parents are separated and the mother tends to be with a new man and, you know, following that, then that becomes one of the areas. Yeah. So these are causes of abuse. Now, who's the perpetrator? We often think it's outside the home, but look at that. Mother is the highest number being the perpetrator. Father being the highest, second highest, around there. And so if we think of mother as caregiver, then we think mother has all rights. But when mother takes up all rights, then child loses their rights. So this is why when I showed you that picture of Jesus with those children, we often think that the parent with their children is a safe environment, is a happy environment, is an environment where children can be free, but yet the children are in need of care and protection from father and mother who are potential perpetrators too. Yeah? This is scary, isn't it? Then you add on stepmother, stepfather, siblings, other siblings, relatives, and caregivers. Look, the stranger is not all there. The stranger comes way down. Yeah. And so when we think about, you know, who is a perpetrator in a person's life, we often think it is outside the circle. So you just imagine then if a perpetrator is coming from the inner circle, the child is in conflict. What do I say? What is right? What is wrong? Many children who have told the other parent or some other person in the family, that person doesn't believe them, and the abuse then continues. Okay, so think of the perpetrator. Now we think of children in need of protection in relation to their sex, in relation to the types of cases. So when we think of children, so we can see the males and the females here, right? And we see the numbers and the percentages. The ones that I highlighted in yellow speak of physical injury, sexual abuse, and neglect. And these are three of the categories that I will be expanding on. But I put in purple emotional injury, because emotional abuse is also a category that we want to consider in terms of maltreatment. But yet the number in relation to emotional injury is low, much lower compared to the other three categories. And so the question is it because they don't experience much emotional injury, or is it because it is not captured? And therefore, do we only begin to highlight that an abuse is happening or maltreatment is happening because it is observable in terms of a physical injury, in terms of a sexual abuse that can be shown medically, that can be tested, or even in terms of neglect, because it is very obvious when the child is skinny, thin, cannot eat, you know, dressed shabbily, no roaming the streets, nowhere to go. These are things we can observe, we can see. But the one difficult to see, which is emotional injury, is something maybe we want to think about. Now, the ones that are highlighted in yellow, the three, physical, sexual, and neglect, make up 87% of all the cases that were recorded. And this is a really high number. So the question is, what are we doing about it when we see physical injury, sexual abuse, and neglect? How many cases are even reported? So this is the list of articles or online, if you would like to go and read further or find things from there. A lot of what I'm putting in the next few slides comes from these places as well. It's not rocket science. It's not something I have to make up out of the top of my head, but the information is out there. But I think we're here today to open the discussion around it so that then we can come to be clearer on this matter. So let's start with physical abuse. And I think this is a very sad picture. And I ask you to feel again. As I asked you in the beginning, when we go through this, can you feel? What do you feel? When you see something like this, what does it make you feel inside? Does it make your stomach churn? Does it make your legs turn to jelly? Does it make you want to look away? You know, because many of us don't see. Do we have children in our homes who have looked like this? Did we look like this when we were children? A big question to ask and to begin to feel. And so then I ask you to think about physical abuse on a child. What is physical abuse? The definition out there talks about and says is something that is purposely done, purposely physically injuring and putting at risk of harm, putting a child in the risk of harm. Now, this kind of a phase tendency, it can only come when the child is engaging with another person. Oh, some might say they fell down from the swing. Okay, perhaps. But we're talking about abuse. And if it is abuse, the question is, where was the adult when that child was falling from whichever place as well? Because what is allowed, because that refers to neglect then, okay? If we're saying that this happened falling down from a swing or playing in the scaffolding or something like that. But other than that, it could come from actual blows from a person. Who would give child blows like this? For a person to do this to this extent, I'm not sure how easily a person can do this. What state of mind must they be in to do this to a child? And you know, what's going on in their head for them to do this? Okay, so this is physical abuse. It's hitting, whether with your hand, with a stick, with a strap, with an object. Many people use the belt, and some people just take the chair and break the chair over the child. You know, punching, beating. I ask you to feel these things, okay? Because we watch a lot of this in TV. You know, these shows of somebody hitting the other and punching and things. But we become numb to it because, it's the TV. It's just a movie out there. But I ask you to feel it in terms of real life. I ask you to feel it in terms of what happened even in your life or someone that you know. Kicking. And I'm not talking about kicking in the dirt. I'm talking about somebody actually kicking, biting, burning, throwing. And I'm not saying throwing a thing at you. It's taking you and throwing you against the wall. I've known kids who the school teachers so angry they picked the kid up and threw them in the big dustbin outside the school. Stabbing, choking, shaking, so many things. You know, if you think of a little kid running and playing, and the parent is so unhappy, picks the child up and just shakes that child. You know, what's going on? What's happening? Just feel this. Then we look at emotional abuse. So when I was thinking emotional abuse, I said, this is something we cannot see. And then I found this very interesting painting out there. The painting is called Sharp Tongue. It's an art print by an artist called Nella Donato. And she writes about the sharp tongue, laser tongues, and what they do to a person. Injuring a child's self-esteem or emotional well-being. It includes verbal, emotional assault, such as well as isolating, ignoring, or rejecting a child. Emotional abuse is something we cannot see, unfortunately. And because we cannot see, is a question about, do we try to look and understand more? Sometimes we hear in terms of a sound level, but very often the level of sound is not made high in a public place. These are done in private spaces, like at home. And it means that someone outside don't hear it as much, and therefore they're not able to notice it. But just think about a child, and a child with low esteem, a child with low confidence. It comes out in the form of how they refer in school. A child who has been emotionally abused at home is a child very easily bullied in school. Yeah, and then we will see developmental effects. So I ask you to now feel this child's emotional abuse. Feel sharp tongues, criticizing. Very different from that image of that I showed you in the beginning of Jesus and those children, and that feeling of, being loved, being free to speak, to say, to feel warm, to feel cuddled. But here you have a laser tongue, criticizing. How much of this does a child hear compared to words that are loving and engaging and accepting? Belittling. Belittling means putting down, making somebody so small. Words that belittle and that criticize very often bring on the emotion of shame. And a person who is ashamed of themselves eventually don't wish to be seen anymore, don't wish for any light to shine on them. And often this leads them to want to kill themselves and get rid of themselves. Okay? Berating. Have you experienced when somebody is berating you, just going on and on and on? Threatening you. If you don't do your work, no food for you today. You can get out of this house, etc. And how many of these threats actually are enforced in a child's life? Withholding love, support, or guidance. Isolating, ignoring, rejecting. Very powerful stuff. And I ask you to feel them all. Do I have one more? Yes. And I asked you about laughing. We think that laughter is a good thing and a nice thing. But very often people who are experiencing shame in their lives are those who have people laughing at them and making them into a joke and creating confusion in their lives, making them feel lost, not sure, don't know what to be. And so they lose their sense of inner locus of control, we say. They forget that they have a freedom to choose what they are to be and how they are to be, because the sounds from outside make that child not know how to access their talent and gift from inside. And these are children who grow up just responding to the expectations of the outer world and therefore putting themselves in harm's way. Whose responsibility is it? The child's? Who asked the child to go there, you will say? The child's responsibility or the adults to protect the child? So I ask you to reflect. Emotional abuse is what brings people into my office every day. And we feel the pain of what they have experienced, not necessarily only when they're children, but even once they become adult, because the child in them couldn't grow up, is stuck, is trapped in this place of horror, in this place of pain, in this place of abuse. So I ask you to feel. Now we go to what is even worse. This is sexual abuse. And the image I put here is one that says, shh, don't tell. Secret. It's between you and me. Now, this happens also in the home and under the roof. And if you have a child who is uncertain of their locus of control, of freedom to speak and to say to whoever out there who will believe them and protect them, then the child listens to this influential adult around them who says, shh, this is secret between you and me. And the child doesn't trust their discomfort on the inside. I have a story of a person, of course, now she's an adult, but whose family made her feel horrible her whole life, because at 5 years old, when she was playing with her friend in the friend's house, the friend's father called the two children and he did something awful to them. He licked them in their private parts. And this child, of course, didn't know, because the other child was, this is something that happened in her house. So when she went home and told her parents and her aunt, of course, they prevented her from going there. They didn't report it. They didn't report the man. And so God only knows what happened to her friend, the little 5-year-old girl. But what happened to this 5-year-old girl, from being a carefree child who was free to go with friends, to play, she began to be trapped in her home. And parents began to function from a place of fear. And she never knew what she did wrong. To her, she thought she did wrong in her life. And this became the legacy in her life. There was nothing she did which made her parents happy with her. And her parents never spoke about it. So this is the secret that she had to grow up with until she married a man who also continued to treat her in that same way, as if there's something so bad about her. So see, hiding these things, not talking about it, not expressing it, makes people end up in very bad situations. So why we need to tell this out, not secret. What do people do in sexual abuse? Fondling of children's genitals, penetration, incest, rape, sodomy, indecent exposure. Now, of course, these are already crossing the line, hurting the child. But what about taking the child now and putting into trafficking and prostitution? And the production of pornographic materials, using children in such materials. But this is not just using children in such materials and exploiting them, but it's also showing such materials to children when we talk about indecent exposure, because it creates conflict and the child doesn't know what is okay and what is not okay. So just yesterday, I had a little boy who came to me at 11 years old, and he told me, I feel very bad because I'm looking at these pictures and videos on the side. And, and I asked him, what videos are you looking at? What pictures? He said, just children messy. And then he said, I had to come out and tell my parents I did this. He was so cute. And he said, so I asked parents, so did you see? What did he? Then they said, no. He already cleared out the history, so we don't know what he was seeing. But he told them, no, let's go and talk about it. So they came to see me and we talked about it. So I asked him, can you show me? Can you find it on my phone? And he did it. And what was it? It was just cute pictures of children, scribbling on the walls, throwing their food around, messy faced, and very innocent pictures. But the pictures were signs of feeling carefree, a child who's free to do things and enjoy themselves. But he was punishing himself and saying, these are bad, I cannot be doing this, I have to be doing my work, I mustn't be distracted at 11 years old. And so I asked his parents, is this bad? And they said no. And I also told him, no, there's nothing wrong here. But it seemed like it was a clue for him that something was not right. The thing that was not right, which we clarified, was the fact that he was feeling like he needed some freedom, like life is so caged up and so suffocated that these pictures made him feel so free. And he needed this freedom, but he didn't understand it. And he was just naturally going to find these things. And what we came to tell him was that the thing that makes him have bad feeling is the fact that he did it without telling somebody that he feels like doing it. And he didn't know how to express it. But he was smart enough to be able to come to a place where he says, something is wrong, I must tell my parents. And he told his parents, which brought them in, and therefore we could have this conversation to understand and relieve him of his anxiety around it, and give him permission to have more fun in this way, and to recognize that he's feeling trapped, he's feeling lonely, stuck at home in this way. No friends, no siblings to play with. This is not nice for an 11-year-old boy. And so we were able to come to something. But see, he presented as if he was looking at stuff that's bad. And so see, a lot of people don't know what is good and what is bad to be seen out there, and children especially. And this is the part where what this boy needed to learn was that if you're feeling, you need to have some fun and you want to see something, even though you went and looked at it, you can always just go and call your parents and say, I'm looking at this, is it okay for now? So it's not a secret, because it's the secret bit that makes the child start to feel bad, like something is not right. Because when you have adults around who are able to help that child to know what is okay and what is not okay, that's when the child can have a bit more freedom. Okay, so this is when we're thinking sexual abuse. And the fourth thing we want to look at are forms of neglect. The first form of neglect is physical, where we have failure to provide food, shelter, lack of appropriate supervision. So when the physical environment is not provided, then we say that the child is experiencing neglect. And this is where you will find that the child has nothing to eat, they're going hungry, you find that they've lost weight. Maybe they have nobody at home watching them when they're very much younger. And this is something that's happening with a lot of parents out there working, and where they don't have proper care for the child. The other form of neglect is medical, when we think of a child who's ill and they're not being given the treatment. When a child who's undergoing a lot of stress, and the child doesn't know how to say that something is bad, to the point that the child doesn't get treatment. Now, many people are quick to take their child to the doctor for cough, cold, and things, but many people are still afraid to bring their child to see a mental health professional when there is a problem with the child. They say stomach ache, don't want to go to school, I can't do this, don't finish my homework. They're not being taken to find out why. And sometimes by the time the child is brought, the child is in quite a severe condition. So when you think about withholding treatment and support to the child, then we think of children who end up suffering, forming personalities and attitudes in life, which can become abusive later on in their life too. When we think of forms of neglect in terms of education or special education, under the UNCRC, we say that all children should be given the right to education, no matter in what form. Now, when we think of a parent, I remember a case where there was a Form 2 girl, so she's 14 years old, and she would stop going to school for some period of time. And the neighbor came to find out and was wondering what was happening. And parents seemed to be always indoors, closing the curtains, not wanting much exposure to people out there. There was a little bit of mental illness in that home. But they seemed to get along well enough and cope well enough. And so the teacher was asked about it too. And we tried to find a way to get the child some kind of support. But eventually, all parties involved needed to say what they would be willing to do for the child if this went to the place where the child was finally removed from the family, if there was seen to be a form of neglect. And unfortunately, nobody wanted to take that level of responsibility. So the case got dropped. And when the case got dropped, then from the perspective of the neighbor just said, I will just continue to look out and be friends with the child so that if the child needs, they will come over. And that continued. And today the child's grown up and able to go out and work and still managing in some ways. So it's not always bad situations that end up, but it is also a question on our levels of responsibility of what we're willing to do. And finally, when we think of emotional neglect, this is an inattention to the child's emotional needs. And this is the part where especially teenagers, when they're between 13 and 15, they experience a lot of emotional turbulence, a lot of moods, and a lot of conflict about their identity even. And during this period of time, there is a lot of argument often at home, and nobody goes out to seek help because everybody's too afraid to admit that there's something wrong somewhere. And eventually, by the time they are 15, 16, some even at 14, they begin to experiment with alcohol and drugs. I've got cases like this where parents are not in the know of because of divorce and because of separation and no proper care. I have cases where somebody's been to school and beaten up blue and black, but not on the face and not on places where you can see, because kids know how to bully. And this child didn't feel bad about it. And when I asked, what, no pain? You didn't feel bad about it? And the person laughed and said, yeah, they've become my best friends too. And the question was, the pain that they experienced being beaten up as a 14-year-old in school by the peers, was it as painful or was it less painful than the emotional pain that they were experiencing due to the neglect from parents, rejection from parents? And this is a person who always felt that the parents divorced because of him. And is that fair? So to grow up in your life feeling that you were responsible, when in reality, you were just a child. There's nothing, but they didn't know this. And so by the time 16 years old was up, the use of alcohol was in. By the time 18 years old was up, the use of drugs was in. But yet able to maintain, go out and work, go out and study, maintain something. And parents had no clue that the child was going through this. So I asked the question then, where are the parents in the life of this person? And how come they didn't know that all of this was happening? Was their child so good at hiding? Or was it that they were too caught up in their own worlds and their own lives that they neglected the child? So these are just some ways to think about the 4 forms of abuse in that sense. Now let's take it into your signs and symptoms, which is supposed to be the main core of today's talk, but this is all around it to bring us to the signs and symptoms. And when we think signs and symptoms, we can only see signs and symptoms when they've reached the external perspective. So signs and symptoms are seen behaviorally and physically. So what are some of these behavioral signs? When you think of a child, an infant, you feel a child is crying all the time. And very often, these types of problems are medicalized. The child has colic, the child has stomach problems, or the child is not feeling well for some reason. Take to the doctor, take to the doctor. I'm not saying don't take to the doctor, but I'm saying nobody thinks that the child is crying excessively because the child, like a sponge, feels the stress that the parents are going through. The child feels the levels of anger, anxiety, sadness that the parents are going through. And the child reflects this out. Because what has been found in signs of developmental delays, problems with attention deficit and hyperactivity, many people like to present it as if it is genetic problems, but the reality is we are born with the genetic of a threshold, but the reality is they still take in what is in the environment now, which is too troubling and disturbing that makes the focus become difficult. So these are some signs. fear, anxiety. What happens when you have a clinging child? Do you tell the child, okay, get off me and go and say hello to the uncle and the auntie? Do we listen that the child is feeling anxious and comfort them? Or do we insist they don't listen to their own feelings? What about children with nightmares, sleeping problems? What about bedwetting? All these are signs that the child is having a lot of fears and discomfort in there. Now, there are many ways in which children can learn to manage these fears, understand it through play therapy, through working with people, with the child in managing these things. Very often, the deep unconscious levels of anxiety and fears that the child is experiencing, which came from their family environment itself, is quite empowering. And you know, it might not even be that this child is the one that people are scolding or, you know, not happy with. It might be the sibling that is creating havoc in the house. But because the sound levels are high, the tension levels are high, the child picks it and then reflects it. And then you begin to see a child that is socially withdrawing, don't know how to make friends, or they're socially awkward. They don't know how to talk to people, and then they get bullied, they get pushed around, yeah, and misunderstood. Then you see those with hyperactivity, they can't sit still, they can't stay focused, they don't listen, they move around for concentration. And then you start to see the school performance decreasing. You start to see the way they speak and their behavior. The child starts to act up and talk in the same way as they have learned from the adults. The bully in school is very often bullied at home, and they have no outlet at home, and they come to school and they bully the next person. Now, I also know young children who were bullied in their schools, and when they went home and told their parents, their nice, good Christian parents told them, oh, you know, poor thing, that child, you know, they don't come from a good family. So, you know, just understand them and go on. And this kind of teaching was something that made the child feel, I have to allow it, I have to give in. And the child just takes it in and takes in and takes in. And by the time the child was 18 years old, the child couldn't take in anymore. And that's the stage beginning into adulthood. And what happened was, started to have seizures in the brain and collapsing. And a lot of times it becomes medicalized again, as I say. And so now everyone wants to treat the medical problem of seizures. But what brought on the seizures, when we look at the whole history behind, was this idea of taking in negative inputs from people, both physically, emotionally, and socially. Yeah. You start by looking at school absenteeism. We say ponteng sekolah in Malaysia. We have speech disorders, and these are children who can't speak, and so they need speech therapy. And it's not because they can't speak. Some of them even completely become mute and refuse to speak. We have children who regress. And what does that mean? That means that even though they're 10, 12 years old, they start to suck their thumb. They start to go back and look at their old blanket and start to play with their blanket, you know, the behavior starts to become like that. They reject the solid foods. They want to go back to being like drinking milk, or, you know, just the soft diets, okay? Another sign is they're afraid of their parents. That means they have to behave themselves, not open their mouth, not say a word in front of their parents. Some people have eating issues. By the time they're teenagers, you begin to see how they start to either overeat or not eat, become picky eaters, and end up with eating disorders, which are tied then to depression, passive nature, withdrawing themselves, hiding in their rooms. Some become very angry, aggressive. They destroy things, objects, they break things. Even children do that. Huh? Or they start to hit the pets, bite the pets, and, you know, try to hurt the pets in a sense. We say this is displacement of that experience of theirs. and then substance abuse, like what we talked a little while ago. And today's world, we see a lot more self-harm, such as cutting. Now, they're not cutting because they want to kill themselves. They're cutting because they want to feel themselves. It means that the stress of keeping things in is so bad that to survive, to feel something, they need to cut themselves. And finally, we look at sexualized behavior. And this is where you'd find the young people who are, and this is the part where I say, are we biased in how we view a teenage person who is attracted to wanting love from different people, wanting affection in some of their behaviors, in how they dress, and in how they attract another. And a lot of these are, something is missing in the background. And behind a lot of these comes the lack of feeling loved at home. Now, if I talk about behavior of a child, infant, 2-year-old in specific, who has been sexually abused while being bathed by the stepfather, for example, children like this, even though they don't understand things, you would find that when they're in certain people's environments, the way they sit, they eventually think that to attract people, they need to sit with their legs wide open. At age 2 years old, I saw things like this happening. So if we didn't understand the background, the child would be scolded and said, don't sit like that. This is bad behavior. And this is often what people are saying in daily life to a child, to tell the child to be appropriate. But reality, sometimes the behavior itself is a call for some kind of affection, some kind of stimulation, because we all need to feel loved at the end of the day. And there is a confusion when this form of love has been distorted by an abuse. Now we look at physical signs and symptoms. These are all the common ones. I got headache, I cannot go to school, I got stomach ache, I am not feeling good, and aches and pains start to come. They have somatic complaints where it's sometimes signs in the body, but when you go to the doctor, they can't find much. So very often a lot of medical problems are like this. Now, when it reaches medical problems such as asthma is breathing. These are often things that we say the child is, we say are psychosomatic symptoms. They're psychological problems. It's symbolic of, I can't breathe. Something is making me have difficulty breathing. And so that action has already developed into an internal inflammation that affects them in terms of asthma. So when it becomes medicalized, we treat medical problems, but we never go further than a medical problem to understand what happened to bring it to this point. We also have unexplained symptoms. So sometimes in the medical world, especially when there are unexplained symptoms, they look for signs whether somebody has been poisoning the child or giving the child bad food to eat, making them drink more water instead of food, more salt. And these can then create discomforts in the child. Sometimes you have vomiting, irritability, and abnormal respiration, meaning they perspire abnormally or they are, breathing in a strange way. And a lot of these can be tied to, as you said, head trauma. And head trauma means being hit on the head quite often or quite a lot. So we're not sure, like a concussion, what actually happened. Sore throat is another, because sore throat happens to kids who are being forced into oral sex. Abnormal weight gain or loss, and these are often emotional type problems where the person's self-concept and image is made to feel bad and create confusion in them. You also end up with those eating disorder type problems. Reluctance to use an extremity, meaning if you ask them to do something, they are always reluctant, they're afraid to do something, either high risk or low risk. So So they tend not to move into doing things, or they have difficulty walking, sitting because there's some discomfort somewhere. So when you see a child sitting restlessly, shifting from one side to another, all these are many different signs. Now, but of course, I won't say that just because they did that they were sexually abused. Okay, just because they have genital discomfort does not mean that they have been sexually abused. It might be many things, but it is a sign that says we need to engage in conversation, and we need to begin to understand where this child is coming from, what actually happened. So having openness to conversation, sharing, talking, feeling safe as you can do this, will get people to understand where the child is coming from, and then we can help the child. Now, I'm coming towards the end, but I thought that in looking at all of this, this is a lot of stuff and info. I thought we need to understand the difference between violence and conflict, because very often, many people think that a conflict situation is then seen as an abuse. So let's understand the difference. What is a conflict? Conflict just says that you and I have a different perspective. I have many people, when I tell them that the reason why they reach this place is because of all these bad things that happened to them, and they are absolutely not agreeing with me and say, no, I don't think so. I think this is fine. So this is a conflict in terms of a difference of opinion, difference in perspective. There's nothing wrong with a conflict. But in terms of conflicts, it means that we need to have better understanding. So we are encouraged to have empathy, to step into the other side, try to understand, try to know through communication. And when we can begin to understand where they come from, what are their fears, then we can negotiate and compromise and come out into an approach. Now, conflicts happen at home too, and in our world every day. The key is conflict is not power-driven. It doesn't mean I must win over you because I am right and you are wrong, or I'm the boss. And this is not what a conflict is. Okay, so the challenge is, how does something begin, and is it power driven or not? So when a person is in high conflict situations, generally you find there's an inability to communicate. People tend to be quite rigid in their thinking. They can't shift those perspectives, and they have difficulty to be adaptable and flexible. So this might just mean it takes time to communicate, to understand, and take time to make shifts happen. And we can't rush a person into something. And children are often rushed into life by their parents, because parents have had time to think what they want to do and how they want to do something. And then they announce it to the child and say, okay, we are moving house and like this, and you will be moving from this school to that school. And before you know it, this happens. And the child didn't have time to even process. What does this mean? What does it mean to say goodbye to my friends? What does it mean to go into a new place? And so we throw children into the deep end, if you want to say, between how adults make choices and decisions and create such conflicts in children's lives. And the key here is lack of communication. And if we can communicate better and help people take time to adjust, we are all human beings whose brains are adaptable and flexible if given the time. It has survived us these millions of years and made human beings evolve. And all we need to do is not rush it, but work together on it. No issues with conflict. But what happens to violence? What is violence? Violence is about injustice and is about power. And that's why when we talk about maltreatment, we talk about maltreatment in relation to violence. Remember my definition in the start, where we talked about abuse being something that was cruel and violent. And we bring the word violence back again, because in violence, there is an imposition of power. So does the person in the power position use that power to abuse the other? Very often, this is the dynamic in any abuse situation. So when a person says, oh, that girl got raped because she didn't dress properly, the answer is it's not because of how she dressed, but it is because the person who's the rapist wants to feel powerful over another. And if that person was feeling that this girl is so carefree and as if she's feeling powerful in her life and independent in her life, and this troubles the perpetrator, then this becomes the targeted person. So very often it's the child who's carefree, who's happy, who's the freedom to move, and then nobody's watching. Then you would find the perpetrator is attracted to this, and then they steal that freedom away, and they make the child end up in that trapped situation. Some use coercive, threatening strategies. Some use sweet talking to be able to draw them in. And it's very difficult to see what is it that the person is trying to do until you got hit in that sense. Very often, power is driving all of this. Some people use threats, harm, isolation. This happens a lot at homes in domestic violence type environments. So when you look at any abusive environment and you think of perpetrator, think power. Don't think abuse. Don't think conflict. Don't think that it's just punishment, it's just discipline. No, we think power, because underneath all forms of abuse is a perpetrator who feels that their power is being taken from them and they need to gain this power back. And that's why they go to that extreme of physical, emotional, psychological, financial, sexual, even systemic types of abuse. Yeah, and we see it at all different levels. So just think about it in that way. So even if you say that a parent wants to punish their child and takes out the cane to give the child a few painful cane whacks, what happens when the parent loses it and you just have to keep going? It's a fine line between discipline and then they lost their sense of power within, as if they feel you're doing this to hurt me and to shame me, and then they just go on with it. So underneath all forms of violence is power. So remember that. Now, finally, is abuse explicit or is it implicit? Now, when we think of the word explicit, we think of something we can see is spoken about and is noticed from all that we've talked about today. Or is it implicit? What is the meaning of implicit? It means it's not noticed, it's guessed. It's as if we see from here to there and we fill in the blanks. So when I ask about abuse and how we are part of a system that creates abuse, I think of explicit or implicit. And I think of the individual as we look at this model that I've put here. This is a theory called the ecological systems theory by Yuri Bonfenbrenner. And this is the part where he says, each of us, where's my mouse? Each of us, just like the child, is one unit. But this person is not alone in the world, separate from systems. We are tied to many systems. We are tied to the microsystems like our immediate environment of family, friends, neighbors, school. We are tied to mesosystems, the connections and networks that we have. Exosystems are indirect environment, macrosystems are social cultural values, and when we think of chronosystems, it's changes over time. So we are all affected by everything: people, community, social, religious settings, politics in your country, in your environment, in your neighborhood, politics at every level that hits people, economic situations that impose financial pain onto people, and injustices are happening at every level of this ecological system. And the child is not just abused in one level. The child receives this abuse from all levels. So all levels of society need to be impacted to bring about change, to work together towards helping save the child from any forms of maltreatment. So finally, when we think of explicit, implicit, I ask you to think of what is conscious and what is unconscious. Very often, people are abused in environments where we are unconscious. How do we work to make what is unconscious more conscious so that we can prevent it? Spoken versus the unspoken. And just as I said just now, when we think of the implicit, how many of us are secret, cannot talk, cannot speak, cannot say, and what is unspoken forms implicit attitudes, ideas within ourselves that make us either end up being abused or become abusers. What is seen versus unseen? We can manage what is we can see and what we can hear and what we are conscious of. But what about when we cannot see it? Then we don't notice it. Do we only do something because we saw a bruise, a mark? Do we have to only get to a point of a physical abuse mark before we take action? Or do we start in the whole developmental process? Do we look at what is observable only, or also what is assumed and perceived? So how do we also notice what we are assuming and what we perceive in our environment? Don't jump to conclusions, but it means open for conversations. Open for conversations to understand, to get to know, and to be able to evaluate in a more objective manner. And when uncertain, don't hide it at home and pretend, but instead go out, seek professional help so that you can manage it earlier. And with that, I come to the end and question and answers. Thank you for all your patience in listening. I'm going to pull the presentation down.
Thank you, Dr. Valerie. And now we are open for Q&A sessions. Okay, so far there's none in the chat box.
None in the chat box.
So maybe they want to ask
Any from
directly.
outside? Yes.
You can unmute yourself and ask question. Okay, there's one question, Doctor.
Yes.
Sorry, there's two questions. Okay.
Yes.
One, mothers and fathers seems to lead the standing of maltreatment of children. Is laying hands on one's child for disciplinary reason also considered maltreatment? If yes, how can children or those around make reports, and to whom? And then based on your experience, how do children who face maltreatment come out of it and heal? Do you think that all children who go through it are getting the help they need?
Okay, very good questions. First of all, I think I said that earlier, the difference between a conflict situation and the violence situation, and that discipline and abuse. There is nothing wrong with any forms of discipline as long as we are aware that this is why I am punishing my child. And we all know that sometimes when you want a child to stop doing something, we use expressions. We use our eyes, we stare at them, we don't smile as we talk to them. I had one lady who told me, you know, my child keeps sticking their tongue out at people and we keep telling her to stop it. So I asked her, how do you tell your child to stop it? And she said, I smile and don't stick your tongue out, don't stick your tongue out. And that's a very nice way of talking to a child. That sounds like you're encouraging the child. And so she had to learn that she had to make a very stern face, very serious look, and even raise the tone of her voice to make it firm so that the child hears the difference. Children take from our whole body. They are not learning because just from the head. So based on how we look, our signs, our senses, our body behavior, they learn something. And so sometimes when you feel something painful, you learn the lesson. It's just like, don't put your hand in the fire, don't touch the fire, don't touch the fire. You can say that 100 times, but the minute their finger went near and they felt hot, they immediately pull that away, and that becomes an experience. So sometimes forms of punishment where they feel a little bit of a pain, this is not bad. Similarly, it's good that children fall down and feel pain, but don't fall down from 2-story building. Let them fall down in the park, on the grass, on a bit of road. Yes, they'll get a cut, a bruise, and they'll cry their eyes out. But you know, all this strengthens them and toughens them up inside. But when we keep them all covered up at home, overprotecting, this is also a form of abuse, helicopter parenting, where you suffocate the child at home and don't let them move to the point that by the time they're adult, they don't know how to do things because you've done everything for them. And this I would call is an extremely implicit way of abusing that child, if you want to think about it. Yeah. So what do we tell? We must always have a balance of something. But when I said it became abuse is when the person is angry and you want to punish your child, and that anger inside you is saying that this child is out to embarrass me, to make me look bad, and is hurting me. And then the punishment that comes, it's like you got to spend all that energy getting it all out, all the anger out, and the one who received it is the child. Now that kind of punishment, I would say, is not punishment. That is an injustice. And that is an abuse. But do we report those kinds of abuses and then take them to court, etc., which is the second part of the question?
Yes.
And the answer is, do we? I don't think so, because our courts can't even settle the cases that they do have. And, you know, they still fight over it. But I think this is a part where the community can help, the family can help, the extensions of the family can help, where we need to highlight and tell a person that that's not how you treat a child. And as much as people might say that that's interference, this is why we have extensions. We don't have people standing around watching a person hit the child to that degree. We need people to intervene and say, stop it, because somebody out there can stop it. Because when they can't stop it, then this becomes violence in the home. And then violence in the home that is repeated is to be reported out to the police. Okay, so have I answered the two questions then?
No, the second question is, does the children that faces maltreatment come out and heal? And are they getting the help they need?
I don't know whether all children are getting the help they need. I don't think so. Because for children to get help, their parents must recognize it and give permission. We do have now some hotlines where children are able to call, like Childline, where they can talk to somebody without their parents' knowledge in that sense. But this kind of support is still limited, because as much as a child can say something and do something, there are laws around things. And if we take a child out of their home, then social welfare needs to be involved. And the question is, when we take a child from a home, from their family, away from the people who so-called they are familiar with, and put them into a social welfare home, because we all know how wonderful these homes are out there, then the question is, are we doing a greater injustice to the child, or are we in the community stepping in to try and find a way? So there are laws and there are laws, and then there are ways to manage it, okay? So I think it's good that we have a PSO office where people can come and actually look at this and perhaps find an alternative to just going through this whole legal route out there, where maybe we can have community-based approaches to supporting families, bringing out conversations and communication, and even getting people professional help as and where they need. Yeah.
Okay, there's another question, Doctor.
Yeah.
What would you say is the strongest predictor of child maltreatment? And another one is, and are there any particular children at increased risk?
And is it the socioeconomic status and things?
Yes, status, race, culture, and background.
This is a tough question to answer. What is the strongest predictor of child maltreatment?
Yes.
At the end of the day, all forms of abuse or abusers, perpetrators, are people who are wounded people in themselves. I don't believe a healthy person can abuse another. And so if we saw that child's picture with the bruises on that child's face, I don't think that any healthy person even if you hit the child to some degree and then you suddenly saw this, that you would not feel upset and you would pull back, you know. But a person who can see it and still keep going on and going on, this is clearly someone who has psychological problems. And the question is, when will we stop the stigma of psychological problems getting help? Because one of the signs, they say, is that when you have people with mental illness, then tendency for abuse is there. And I won't disagree 100% with that, because I'd say that underlying anger issues or irrational jealousies and things like this that bring on abuses, I'd say that underlying these are personalities which are disordered. Not necessarily mentally ill, meaning not necessarily depressed, taking medication. But the clue here is we don't want to discriminate people, but I would like to say that there are many people who come in for help. There are many people who come and work on it with counselors and psychologists to understand why they do what they do, how do they manage it better. And I say that these are people who, even though they have some of these traits, they are behaving very responsibly out there. And that this should not be a discriminating factor against those people who seek treatment. But there are many people out there who are in denial of themselves and think that they are right and their way is right, and they continue to perpetrate out there. And these are the people who are not seeking treatment. As long as they don't seek treatment and they don't acknowledge that they need help, then these are the people that need to be taken into the system, the legal system if necessary, because there is a high danger of having such in the environment. But these are all people who have personality disorders more than just mental illness, okay? More than people just needing medication. Very often the people who get the medication, who are having signs that they are afraid and they can't sleep, they have high anxiety, in their life, in their system, might be an abusive person perpetrating. And that abusive person is often not the one who is picked up, but the one who is highlighted is the one who's just getting treatment. And somebody says, oh, that's a mad person, they're taking medication. They're not mad when they're taking medication. They are actually doing a good thing and a responsible thing in their life. Yeah, but we have great stigmas around the world of psychology and psychiatry. Okay, I hope I've answered that. So if I'm talking about the predictor, the predictor, I would say, is people who have some kind of disorder in their background. Okay, and our children, particular children at increased risk in terms of SES, race, cultural background. I don't think that all environments have it. And when we think of personality disorders, you have to understand that there are many who sit in the world of the rich and famous also, who use power to drive their lives. And this is why many of the children of the rich and famous end up with high-risk behaviors as well out there. And they end up with messed up lives too. Okay, the next question is how to handle a child who's bedwetting.
Yeah.
Well, clearly behind bedwetting is an anxious child, anxious and afraid. And well, I'm a therapist, so it means I will always be biased to saying we need to bring the child in to encounter forms of therapy that help them to release that anxiety. If we can begin to map together and understand what perhaps is creating the anxiety for the child and the parents are aware, then parents can manage some of this at home. And in another way, children go through experiences of play and sand play therapies where they're able to express themselves and work this stress out in some way and strengthen themselves within themselves in their psyche, we say. And with that, eventually the bedwetting ends when they're able to unload it in some other way. Because children are not necessarily verbal to be able to make logic and sense of what makes them go this way. So clearly behind bedwetting is a fearful child. There's something scary in that environment. Who is making the child scared? What is making the child scared? I had a child who was doing this bedwetting, and the problem was the older brother, who had just turned a teenager, who was an extremely aggressive boy, couldn't lose anything. He'd fight, he'd scream, he'd throw things, that he made his younger brother very, very afraid, and he was bedwetting all the time. And the minute that older brother was managed and calmed down and not so bad anymore and channeled his energies positively, all the bedwetting stopped at home. So these are usually similar examples of how they tie in. Okay, then there's a question about the church next. Is the church...
Do you think the church, either parish or archdiocese or through the PSO, set up a hotline to handle cases of maltreatment and so on? Are there enough help centers now?
Okay, I don't think there are ever enough help centers. And all of this costs as well to set up things. But I do believe, maybe not a hotline through the PSO, but I do think the church is organizing counseling on a line. I think it's a Shalom Care line. I think they're in the process of getting it running and moving. And if you collaborate together, then I would believe if counselors online pick up something that needs support from the PSO office, then this can be channeled. So it's not necessary for each office to set up their own hotlines in that sense. But if you have screening levels, you know, where then we understand and decide how to reach out and support people, this is also good. Yeah.
Okay. There's another question, quite interesting. Yeah, is a perpetrator self-aware enough to get the help that they need, since we can't force them to seek treatment either way?
Yes.
Quite interesting.
Yes. When we think of a person who's a perpetrator, we don't think perpetrator in terms of criminal yet, but if we think of in terms of family setting and there's something not right, this is where then the husband and wife, the spouses can talk together, or the couple as friends, you know, bring another couple in, talk among themselves first, and then come to get help and maybe get involved with a professional. Sometimes what I found, if I'm giving a talk on some issue like this, I've had parents who sit in the room and then they suddenly in shock because they didn't realize certain things and they notice certain things happening, and then they come and on the side and they say something. Yeah. Then among the two, the couple, one might be willing to come out and talk about it and admit and say something. The other may be completely uncooperative, and they don't want to talk to anybody about it because they think that they are right and they don't need other people's opinions in a sense. Okay, so this is the part where I said that sometimes people who are a bit more rigid in their conflict management, that they think that they're all right. So the question is whether they feel that their power is being taken away if an external party had to come in. So we can work sometimes through the party that is open to understanding, because then that party can go back home and they can negotiate in the way that works for them to be able to do something for the child. So it's not true that the perpetrator is lacking awareness or something like this. So if I give you an example of a parent or a child who came in because didn't want to go to school, would throw a big tantrum, wouldn't get up, would kick, scream at the parents and things like this. So eventually they came in and the child talked with the counselor and diffused to some degree. But in the course of talking to the parent, while the child was in session, the parent was talking, one parent was talking. And I said, oh, how about bringing the other parent in? You know, I think it would be good to meet both the parents and then understand where they're coming from. And the other parent never came in. And this parent kept making excuses after excuses why the other parent is not coming. But it was very clear the other parent absolutely refused to come. And it couldn't actually say this. And then it began to be clearer to me that perhaps the one who is making these loud sounds and making this girl scared and impose and things is actually the parent. And something in that nature is reflected in the school, which is where the drama lies. And one day, when this child came for her session, the parent that brings the child came along and brought another child who is also of the same gender, and just to accompany. And when I saw that child and the behavior of that child, I said, oh my goodness, this is a model, a chop model of reflecting the parent who didn't come, and the imposing ways, the way of talking, because children model it. They model how their parents are talking. And I saw, my God, this one talks just like that. And the other one is so afraid and hiding. It really opposites. And it was more that the child was unable to find herself because, this strong nature was out there in school as well. So she couldn't escape it from home to school. So eventually the parents had to shift her to another school so that she and the sister, who was extremely strong character, imposing this, was no longer in her life in that degree. And then there were no more issues. But the problem was the strong nature was actually mother's nature. And it's not that the mother's nature is wrong or is bad, but it's that two girls couldn't do the same. And so one became like this and one became. So the minute you separated them, each could have their outlets and find a natural balance. And then things became normal. So it's quite complicated when you want to think about things. You really have to take a step away from the situation and observe it, and dig to understand the finer qualities within. So would I call that a situation of a perpetrator per se? No. I would say that the child reached a place of conflict, and the behaviors that were there were bad. But because the child refused to go to school, every day the child would end up in a screaming match with the parent. Because the parent would insist you have to go, and the child would insist I'm not budging and I'm not moving. And so lots of forms of punishment went on for some period of time. And eventually when they came to hear that there might be something more, and then the parent brought the child out, is when they began to see a different perspective. And then that dynamic was able to stop. So it's not necessary that the parent who is strong-minded or, in that position, seen to be the perpetrator. It doesn't mean that if that person doesn't come out for help, that the family still cannot be helped, because we can still help through a different route. So we still help people from many angles, no matter the approach. And if you're saying that the person is a perpetrator, violent and unable to shift, then this is where we need to bring in protection and take the whole family out. And these are situations of domestic violence where children and the parent who is being abused has to find a way out. They go to shelters, and they get support in this way. Okay, and I think PSO office has got their own network with places like this. So if they do identify, then they are able to bring in to find some kind of support. And then reports are made against the perpetrator, and this then is taken to a different level. So social welfare will have to come in, the police will have to come in, because these are where the cases are quite severe already, and the children need care. Okay.
Okay, I guess this is one last question. The question is, what is the best way to approach childhood trauma? Oh, there's one more question. Okay.
Okay. I think when you think of childhood trauma, we all have childhood traumas, okay? There is no human being who is free from childhood trauma in that sense. And very often traumatic experiences of a child are forgotten. We have a defense mechanism called repression, which is another word for forgetting, where it gets buried away. But just because we don't remember, so these are when people say, oh, I forgot. I don't remember my childhood. I don't remember things that happened to me when I was young. And sometimes that's because the defense mechanism was at play to keep one surviving, and the children forget. So they not only forget the painful memories, but they also forget the happy memories. And it's just a complete forgetfulness. So what happens in therapeutic environments is, as we begin to explore history and understanding a story, and sometimes what happens is the person is trapped currently now in a place of pain in their life. We stay with feelings, which is what I asked you to start this session with, staying in the feeling of what is that person's experience. And we often talk about that feeling in relation to body. The body traps it and feels something. And from staying in emotions, memories come back. And they slowly come back. But we need to allow them to come back slowly and in a safe environment where they know that somebody is in taking care of that space. Because if you go out and you're talking to your friend and you say, you know, I'm remembering and I had this bad experience, and your friend just pushes it away or makes fun, or family members do that to each other, they don't really listen and hold that space for you, then the pain is just buried again and becomes worse. So a therapeutic environment is one where people can feel that safety of the space. And in the space, we, the therapists, we don't tell you what to do, but we stay with you so that you're not afraid to feel the pain. And as you feel that pain, it calls on memories. And you start to remember all the times you felt pains like this in your life. And the minute we are able to give voice, we are no longer keeping silent and secret. And we start to give voice to things and we can express them. Strangely enough, we heal. We heal. And we no longer feel that pain so much. So at the end of the day, it is about finding our voice, expressing things out, not hiding things. And with that, healing can come. There is no limit to the human capability to heal. No limit. We are such amazing creatures created by God that says that the limit is we are limitless when it comes to our potential to heal. And therefore, we never give up. But we live in a world where we are human beings who often give up, or who often don't have enough patience to wait with a person, to stay with a person. We're in a rat race that is chasing people in crazy directions. All we need to do is take time to slow down and breathe together. And that in itself can maybe bring something new. Yeah?
Okay, there's another question, Doctor.
Yes.
Is it possible for a child to go through self-help and heal on their own without seeking professional help or talking about it to anyone as they feel inferior or shy? Okay, would you advise any child to leave their homes to get away from mental or physical abuse?
Tough question. First part of the question, my answer is no, you cannot heal on your own, because a natural process to balance the neurological system is talking. As we express and talk, we turn our nervous system from a heightened state into a calm state. So if we are hiding and keeping secret and staying indoors and just saying, I can figure out in my head, we will never figure it out, because the action to being figuring something out is to talk. It doesn't mean you have to talk to a professional. It could be that you talk to a friend, you talk to a trusted person, we talk to a mentor, we talk to a teacher, we talk to our priest, we go to confession, we say a lot of things. It's all about the regulation process. As we talk, we are changing and regulating ourselves from a place of tense, heightened tense, fear for survival, into a calm. When we are calm and we express, we are allowing our higher functioning of our mind to find creative ways in which you find answers. There is no therapist out there who can give you an answer to what you need to do. But the environment created by the therapist is one of safety, privacy, confidentiality, security, where you can say anything and allow your nervous system to start to regulate. And in that space, we say we find safety. But if at home you have a trusted person that you can express with and they listen to you to whatever end, sure, they can help you heal too. But the goal is not to do it in silence. The goal is we need to express. We're given a mouth to speak for some reason. So we don't hide it away. The more we hide it away, we are pretending that it doesn't exist. And this will continue to encourage repression and denial defense mechanisms in our system instead of encouraging outspoken truth. Okay, there is a value in our expression. It doesn't matter whether you said it in broken language, whether you said it in perfect sentences, whether you use the right articulate words, it doesn't matter, but it matters that you did something. Okay, yeah. Would I advise a child to leave their home? Again, I would try to find who can support the child. Again, what is the age of the child? It also matters. But there are also laws about children going out on their own, and we need to find a way. So sometimes when a child says, I want to run away, there is a reason why they say that. Maybe they're feeling trapped. But perhaps they need to find alternative ways, as in finding a space between one place and another, and insisting that they need help in some way. So if they can't talk to their parents to get this kind of help, then we need to still find who will be their safety network to go to, and not say that I, the external on the phone, tell the child, yes, you please run away from home and go here. Because that in itself is not responsible thing to do. Okay, we need to work together. We need to have community support. We need to ask them about who's the neighbor, who's the friend across the street, whether the grandparents are involved. Is there an uncle? Is there an aunt? Is there a good friend? Who you can get into that space. Okay, so similarly with even suicidal situations, we always have to find who is that network, who are the social support around, and then they might not call it, but we might be the ones to call for them to say that this child is in need of this help and gather that support around before they go in. So it's not so one directional answer, you know, every situation is quite unique in that sense. Okay, and I think there's one more.
Yes, one more. We learn most from our parents, okay? But when parents and family are the highest perpetrators, how do these kids get the help they need when they might not know what is happening to them is wrong? Is our education system doing enough to address these issues in our schools?
Oh, this is an excellent question. It's tied to the model of family systems that I've heard, or Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, yeah? Yeah. Because you're talking about the systems beyond the home, and are these systems equipped enough? I don't think our systems are equipped enough. Our systems, our education system, are not even equipped for different learning styles. And children with different learning styles are further, you know, oppressed in these environments. And we encourage only one thing and not another, and we already make them feel useless and unworthy of life when they can't fit into that one system. So no, there's a huge thing that can be done in our education systems. But for that, we need very progressive people who are willing to make these changes, and progressive governments, which I think we are lacking greatly in. Yeah. But when you say that when the parents are the perpetrators, now you know, this is the part we bring our faith in. And the reality at the end of the day is there is God. I don't know if everybody out here listening believes in God, but remember that God is the ultimate parent. And our parents are only temporary. All of us are only temporary. And as much as a parent can be a perpetrator to their child and not realize it and think that they did the best they could, which they all do. All parents do the best that they can with the little knowledge that they have, and some take the extra pains to even go and learn further. But not everybody is perfect, and we live in an imperfect society. And this is where we need to believe that within each person is our greatest parent, and that is God. And we didn't need people to teach us that God will direct your life, because God moves it anyway if we learn to get in touch with that space. So sometimes in the course of life, we encounter different experiences and different people, and there is something from deep within that moves a child in a particular way. And in that particular way, different forms come and reach out. And some of them end up in prison, and then in prison, they find someone who transforms their life and change their life. So at any stage of life and every stage of life, and no matter whether we are seen as good or bad by the world, deep inside, there is always hope for a person whose life can transform. And I believe God places many opportunities in our lives. Some of us are more aware, some are not so aware. The question is, do we step out of our comforts to reach out and care for one another? Because maybe if we did, we'd have a nicer, happier world to live in. Yeah. There's a question on the statistics. Abuse from parents are the highest. It looks like teachers will need to be trained to look out for abuse. Yes.
Okay. Are there any steps being taken to train teachers in this area? And with this, we also need help parents to deal with stress. How can we do this?
I don't think that the teachers are being trained to look out for these signs. I think that so far, sometimes the teachers themselves are perpetrators in school and even in preschools. I think many of you know that I trained in the Philippines in my degrees, and I would say that early childhood or childhood development is one of the areas of training in the universities. And I'm very happy to say that many of their preschools are being teachers, and people who manage them are people who are trained with master's degrees in childhood education, and therefore finding alternative ways for learning and what's the best in the development of a child, psychological development. I'm not so happy to say what are the trainings of people who are in early childhood levels of education in Malaysia. There is much to be desired. So are we just having people, to enter early childhood education, do you need to have straight A's in school? And do you need to have an ability to be processing, thinking, and what brings a person to this? Or sometimes the principal of the school might be, one or two of the teachers might be, but then they take in and train others who are drop out from schools to do this. And people who drop out from schools are already people with their own traumas in their life. And very often triggers, when a child behaves in a particular way, this can trigger your own past memories, which can trigger certain behaviors. Remember, I talked about implicit and I talked about unconscious. Many people are not aware of why they behave that way, why something triggers, why something makes me upset or unhappy. And we don't live in a culture that stops to introspect or reflect. We are in a culture that says react. And that's why reactions come faster. So no to our education system. I think a lot more can be done. But I do think that many teachers are trying. And I think that there are many teachers who find an interest and then they go on to further study in counseling these days, so that they might not necessarily become counselors, they might continue as teachers, but the scope of education itself helps them to understand some things, and then they learn to manage children from there. Now, we don't always have to have high degrees in things, because there are many courses out there that we can take to be able to equip oneself in knowing more and learning more. And this in itself is also good. Yeah. From the statistics, we see parents are the highest. Oh, okay, that's where we were, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. And do we need to help parents to deal with the stress? Yes, I think there's a never-ending story to parenting programs and understanding parenting. And I don't know, I do know that there's some talks out there and some initiatives being made, but I'm not sure how much. There's never enough, right? We always can do more and more and more. Yeah. And we hope that more people can receive news like this and sharings like this. Yeah.
Okay. There's no more question in the chat box. Okay, it's all clear.
So I gather some of these came from the people watching the YouTubes and
yeah, most of it from YouTube. Okay, so I'll wrap up now since there's no question. Okay, I like the part when Dr. Valerie said, feel the moment. Okay, and the part when she says that we always fail to see teenagers as children because the age group, right, below 18 are children, but we always see them as adults. Okay, or children who are able to think right and wrong. And then this at times, yes, it does encourages discrimination and also to practice their rights as children. Okay, and then the few parts that she said that at the end of the day, we all need to feel loved, which is very important. Yes, children and also we as adults need to feel loved and need to be appreciated. And okay, she made me see the ecological theory of Bronfenbrenner in a different perspective. I've seen it in a different perspective, but now she made me think about it in a different, very different perspective, how children are being abused at every level. So thank you, Dr. Valerie, for that insight. That's my feedback value, actually. And one most important takeaway note is that underneath all abuse is power, practicing their power. So upon saying this, I'd like to pass the floor to Father William. And thank you, Dr. Valerie, for a wonderful talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for that.
Father.
And once again, we put our hands together virtually to thank Dr. Valerie for a wonderful session, for that informative and educative. Truly, truly grateful, Dr. Valerie. Finally, we met online. Finally, we met.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. And, personally, I must say that it was truly informative for me. I've been put in charge of the PSO since 2016 by Archbishop Julian. So this is a new world to me. This is a new world to me. But nevertheless, I've been attending a lot of talks, both physical, face-to-face, as well as online for the last 1 year or so. But I think every talk has been truly a learning experience. It has really broadened my horizons as to how I see child protection work.
Yeah.
And yes, I know we spoke about child abuse, but I kind of tweaked the title a bit, and I said, let it be maltreatment, So thank you for that explanation, though. Thank you. I am truly grateful. So, and also to all our listeners out there, thank you so much. Thank you for your time on a Saturday afternoon. And just to announce that our next talk will be just a week from now. Just a week from now. It will be in Bahasa, Malaysia. It will be given by ASP Nur Faslihani, who is one of the police officer who's attached to D11, which is the department which handles sexual, women and children's issues, of Bukit Aman, the police headquarters. So the title of the talk is going to be Pengendalian Kes Pendarahan dan Seksual Melibatkan Kanak-kanak. We heard today Dr. Valerie, in the first part of her talk, she spoke about the 4 types of abuse, namely physical, emotional, neglect, and sexual. So next week is just going to focus on the sexual abuse and as to how do police handle these cases, yeah, if they were to come up. So I see all of you next week. Thank you once again, Dr. Valerie. Have a great weekend, all of you. And thank you for your time and thank you for listening and tuning in. Thank you. And I'd just like to acknowledge my classmate, Sister Unica, who's a sister. She is a FMM sister all the way from Pakistan. So thank you, Sister Unica, for your time. Maybe you'd like to on the video and say hello. We were in Rome doing the course on safeguarding at the Gregorian. So thank you, Sister Unica. I don't know whether she's still... Yes, Sister.
Thank you, Father. Actually, I have some problem regarding to internet. So I, for some time, I was disconnect, but now I'm there. And thank you very much. I always like whenever you invite me, because I'm also working on safeguarding. So I always find these talks very helpful for me. So thank you, Doctor. For you also, it was very nice. What we learned in this child protection in Rome is it was very much similar, but today I get new information. Thank you very much. Thank you, Father. God bless you. You're continue working for safeguarding. So I'm very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to like to thank the team from the back end as well. Ignatius, thank you so much. Alex and Tian Pereira. Thank you. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. Such a good talk. Thank you, Dr. Valerie. That was so good. Thank you so much.
Coaching. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Father.
Thank you, Dr. Valerie.
Thank you very much, you all.
Thank you, Father.
Valerie. Thank you, Father.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Angelina.